The forest whispered its secrets, calling to the young woman. Her feet moved without hesitation, drawn by an unseen force. She had heard the stories, the warnings of the elders about the forbidden forest, but curiosity burned within her. There was something deep inside her, a thirst for adventure, that could not be quenched by the safety of the village. Just a step farther, she muttered, brushing aside the branches that dared to block her way. The deeper she went, the quieter the world became. The sun's light barely filtered through the thick canopy above, and the shadows seemed to shift and watch her every move. She didn't care. Her eyes were set on the prize, an old stone, half buried in the earth. It gleamed faintly in the half-light, its surface covered in strange markings. She knelt beside it, her fingers brushing the cold surface. A shiver ran down her spine, but she didn't pull back. The stone hummed beneath her touch, and for a moment, everything around her felt different. The air grew thicker, the trees closing in on her, as if the forest itself held its breath. Suddenly, a low tremor shook the ground. It was so subtle she almost missed it. But then, a shadow passed in the corner of her eye. A distant, eerie sound rose from the trees, a whisper carried on the wind. "Leave it alone," the voice urged, barely a breath in the wind. She froze. But when nothing more came, she shook her head, dismissing the warning as nothing but the rustle of the forest. She stood tall, pressing her hand harder against the stone. The air grew heavier, like the weight of forgotten centuries settled around her. "You're imagining things," she whispered to herself, though her heart beat faster. The wind stilled for a moment, and the birds, once singing through the branches, took flight in perfect unison. The usual hum of life in the forest was gone, replaced by an unnatural silence. Her skin prickled, and a sudden chill ran down her spine. She spun around, searching the empty trees, but nothing moved. Then, the ground beneath her feet shifted, just enough to throw her balance. She stumbled, catching herself before she fell. But as her hand finally pulled away from the stone, the wind roared back, fierce and sudden, carrying the scent of smoke, of something old and forgotten. A power, ancient and wild, had stirred. She took a step back, unsure of what was happening. The forest had changed, but in ways she couldn't explain. With the stone untouched, the world seemed darker, as if a veil had been drawn between her and everything she had known. The walk back to the village was long, the once familiar path now feeling strange and twisted. The sky, which had been bright when she left, now loomed overhead in heavy, unnatural clouds. It felt as if something dark had taken root in the air, sinking deep into the earth, feeding on the very life around her. As she neared the village, she could see it. The tension in the air. The villagers, usually so full of life, were silent, their faces drawn, their eyes wide with fear. Whispers curled through the crowd like smoke. Her heart skipped a beat. Something was wrong. She tried to shake off the feeling, but it lingered like the weight of the world pressing against her chest. The elders were gathered, speaking in hushed tones, their voices laced with ancient worry. Their words seemed to hang heavy in the air, filling the space between her and them. "There is a curse," one elder said softly, his voice trembling. "A curse tied to an artifact long lost. If it is awakened, it could destroy us all." She listened closely, though she did not understand. She didn't know that the stone, the one she had touched, was the key to that ancient curse. She only knew that something inside her felt different. The world was no longer the same. As the days passed, misfortune began to strike the village. Livestock sickened and died overnight. Children woke in the middle of the night, burning with fever, their bodies weak. Strange illnesses spread like wildfire, touching homes that had always been untouched by disease. The villagers spoke less openly now, their eyes wary as they glanced in her direction. They did not speak of the curse directly, but she could feel the weight of their gaze, the whispers about her. The stone she had touched, the forbidden path she had walked, it all felt connected to the strange happenings, though she couldn't understand how. Something dark had been awakened, but what? The weight of it pressed on her heart as she walked through the village. Was she the cause of it? Had she unwittingly unleashed the doom the elders had warned about? The truth was too heavy to bear, and yet it was the only truth she had. With each passing day she felt it, the pressure, the whispers of the past, and the undeniable truth that the village, the kingdom itself, was in danger. But from what? And why? The elders gathered once again, their voices rising in intensity as they spoke of the curse, a force once meant to protect, but now a dangerous weapon that could destroy everything. And at the center of it all stood the young woman, unaware that she held the key to this dark, ancient power. The kingdom was teetering on the edge, and the questions were only growing louder. Could she fix it? Or had she already doomed them all? The answers lay within her, but they were tangled in the shadows of the past. And the forest, she could hear it still calling her name. The young woman stood at the edge of the village, looking beyond the familiar paths to where the land blurred into mystery. She was the daughter of the village elder, known for her boldness, her curious heart, and her restless feet. While the other villagers stayed close to their homes, content with the simple life, she was always searching for more. "Why must we stay?" she often asked, her voice carrying the challenge of someone who longed to know what lay beyond the horizon. Her father would speak of the old world, of the wisdom passed down from ancestors, and of the stories that shaped their lives. But those stories, those lessons, never seemed enough. They were too safe, too familiar. She wanted to feel the pulse of something real, something raw. "My child," her father had once said, "you have the heart of the ancients. But you must learn their ways, for the world is not as kind as the stories." But she didn't see it that way. The old ways, the ways of caution and silence, never called to her. She dreamed of more, of adventure, of finding something greater than the small life the village offered. So, she wandered. Not far at first, just beyond the village's borders, where the wild grass met the edge of the unknown. Every day, her steps took her deeper into the land that had always been off-limits. She sought out the hidden things, the untold wonders that only the brave dared speak of. To her, the unknown was a treasure trove waiting to be discovered. The villagers, however, spoke in hushed tones. Their world had changed. Crops had withered, rivers had dried, and the earth itself seemed to grow weaker with each passing day. Once rich and full of life, the kingdom was now a shadow of what it had been. The air felt thick, heavy with uncertainty. Something was wrong. "It is the curse," the elders whispered, looking over their shoulders, as though the words themselves might carry the weight of doom. "The curse that has haunted this land for generations." The young woman listened, but she could not understand. These were stories, not truths. At least, that's what she believed. The kingdom had suffered before, but had not the land always been strong again? Had the rain not once returned, the rivers once more flowing? She couldn't understand why the elders feared so much. One day, the elders gathered again, their voices low, filled with dread. They spoke of a time long ago, when a rival kingdom betrayed the land. The betrayal had been answered with a curse, one meant to keep the land safe, but that now, it seemed, was beginning to awaken. "The curse. It stirs again," one elder said gravely. "We must prepare." But the young woman heard only the same old words, the same old fear. The curse was just a story, wasn't it? She shook her head, unwilling to believe. Still, strange things were happening. The crops did not grow as they should. The winds carried a chill that didn't belong. The birds flew in odd patterns, as if they, too, could feel the shadow that had settled over the kingdom. "I will see for myself," she decided, no longer able to ignore the pull of the unknown. And so, one day she ventured out, farther than she ever had before, toward the forbidden forest that no one dared enter. The villagers spoke of it in whispers, of spirits that lingered there, of creatures unseen by human eyes, of dangers that no one could survive. But her heart burned with the need to know, to understand what lay hidden beneath its ancient boughs. Her footsteps carried her deeper, and soon the sounds of the village faded into silence. The trees seemed to close in on her, the shadows growing darker with each step. Yet, she felt no fear. She had walked this path with her mind already made up. She would find what lay beyond. There, deep within the forest, tangled among the vines and roots, she found it, a stone. It was old, older than the kingdom itself, perhaps. Its surface was covered with symbols, glowing faintly in the dim light, as if it held a secret, a power that was beyond her understanding. Her fingers brushed the stone, and the air around her shifted. The ground beneath her feet trembled lightly. A soft, whispering voice seemed to rise from within the stone itself, urging her to pull back. But she did not. She pressed her palm against it, feeling a strange pulse, a dark energy that made her skin tingle. "Leave it alone," the voice whispered, but she only laughed, shaking her head. It was nothing, she thought. Just the wind playing tricks. Nothing more. But the world around her began to change. The birds that had once sung in the trees fell silent. The wind stopped, leaving the air heavy and still. Her heart quickened as she took a step back. There was a chill now, one that refused to be shaken, settling into her bones. Still, she shrugged it off, unwilling to believe that anything had truly happened. "Just a feeling," she muttered, but the unease wouldn't leave. As she walked back toward the village, the change was impossible to ignore. The air had grown thick, and the skies seemed darker, as though the land itself had grown weary. The villagers, those who had once greeted her with smiles and laughter, now looked away when she passed. They whispered in low voices, eyes wide with fear. "The curse," they said. It had begun again. But to her, it still felt like nothing more than stories. She had touched the stone, yes, but it wasn't the cause of the troubles. Or was it? Something inside her churned with doubt. That night, she spoke to her father, her voice soft but full of questions. "Father," she asked, "what is this curse? And what does it mean for us?" Her father looked at her with eyes full of the wisdom of ages, but his expression was heavy with concern. "You are ready to hear the truth, daughter," he said, his voice grave. "The curse that haunts us was meant to protect the kingdom, but it has become a weapon. One that can destroy all if awakened." She heard the words, but could not yet grasp their meaning. The calm of the village would not last. The kingdom's suffering had only just begun. And soon, the young woman would find herself at the center of a battle, a fight for the kingdom's survival that had been set into motion long before she was born. The young woman returned to the village, her heart heavy with unease. As she stepped through the village gates, a chill crawled up her spine. The familiar warmth of home seemed to have faded, replaced by a thick, suffocating air. The villagers, once eager to greet her, now stood back, their faces tight with worry, their eyes avoiding hers. "Why are they looking at me like this?" she thought. Her footsteps echoed in the silence, each one more unsettling than the last. Something was wrong, but she couldn't yet place it. That night, strange things began to happen. Children, once healthy and full of laughter, grew ill for no reason. Their faces flushed with fever, their bodies weak, as if some unseen force had drained their life. "It's a sickness," the mothers whispered, but no one could explain how or why it spread so quickly. At the same time, fires broke out in the village. Small flames, flickering out of nowhere, consuming dry grass, a hut, then vanishing as quickly as they came. And the village well, once a source of life for all, began to dry, its water running low, a strange foul smell hanging in the air. "I swear the water smells different," someone murmured, their voice trembling with fear. The village was sinking deeper into worry, each day bringing something new, something worse. People spoke of misfortune, of bad luck, but the young woman knew better. She felt it too. The weight of something dark, something ancient, creeping closer with every passing moment. How can this be happening, she wondered. It's just bad luck, nothing more. But deep down, she knew the unease was more than that. It was the very land itself, groaning, reacting to something, to her. In secret, the elders gathered, their voices low, filled with dread. They spoke of an ancient curse, of a betrayal that had cursed the land long ago. The curse that had been set to protect the kingdom, but now they feared was returning, waking from its slumber. "The curse is stirring," one elder whispered. "The stone has been disturbed." The young woman overheard their words. A curse? The same old stories. But even as she dismissed it in her mind, she couldn't ignore the whispers of the villagers. Their fear, their uncertainty, was palpable. They were starting to blame her, the one who had touched the stone, the one who had disturbed something deep within the forest. "She did it," they whispered behind her back. "It's her fault. She's the one who woke the curse." She tried to brush it off, but everywhere she went, eyes followed her. Faces turned away when she came close. The children, once eager to play with her, now ran in fear. Friends, those she had trusted, now spoke to her with cold distance, their eyes filled with suspicion. "What's happening?" she thought, feeling the sting of isolation. The elders had said nothing to her directly, but she could feel their judgment in every word they spoke to others, in every glance they gave her. The village, once a place of comfort, now felt like a prison. Then, on one of those nights, when the village gathered to speak of what had become of them, a figure appeared. His presence seemed to darken the very air, his steps heavy with purpose. The villagers fell silent, their eyes wide with fear as the man walked through their midst. He was a sorcerer, banished long ago for his dealings with forbidden magic. His return had not been expected, but now as he stood before them, they knew the time had come. Without hesitation, the sorcerer looked at the young woman, his eyes sharp, as though he saw through her very soul. His voice was low, powerful, filled with the weight of centuries. "You," he said, pointing a long, bony finger at her. "You have awoken the curse. You have stirred forces beyond your understanding. And now it will destroy you all." His words cut through the crowd, the weight of his warning settling on everyone's shoulders. The villagers stood frozen, eyes darting between the young woman and the sorcerer. His gaze never left her, and his words echoed in her mind, a warning that would not be ignored. "You have awakened something ancient," the sorcerer continued, his voice soft but filled with threat. "A power that was never meant to be touched, never meant to be disturbed. And now, it will tear your kingdom apart." She felt the ground beneath her feet shift, the weight of his words pressing against her chest. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice trembling, unsure if she even believed him. He tilted his head, his lips curling into a cold, knowing smile. "You have a choice," he said. "Let the curse run its course and watch your kingdom fall, or try to break it, and risk everything, including your own life." A chill ran down her spine as his words hung in the air. The power of the curse was beyond her understanding, and yet, she had no choice but to face it. She could feel the eyes of the village on her, the weight of their fear pressing down on her like a heavy stone. "Can it be stopped?" she asked, her heart pounding in her chest. The sorcerer's eyes gleamed with ancient knowledge, his voice laced with a cruel edge. "You think you can control it? You think it can be broken?" He let out a hollow laugh. "It was never meant to be broken. It was meant to destroy." The sorcerer turned and began to leave, his presence still heavy in the air. But his warning lingered, echoing in her mind, tormenting her thoughts. For the first time, she felt the full weight of what she had done. Could she really stop it? Could she really face what she had awakened? She lay awake that night, the sorcerer's words tormenting her, swirling in her mind like a dark storm. She felt the pull of doubt, the fear gnawing at her insides. How could she possibly stop something so powerful, so ancient? And yet, amidst the fear, a spark of determination began to rise. She could not, would not, let her village suffer because of her actions. She had to find a way to stop the curse, no matter the cost. Her heart hardened with resolve. The journey ahead would be long, and filled with danger, but she would face it. She would find the truth, face the curse, and save the kingdom, or die trying. No matter what happened, she would not let her home fall into darkness without a fight. With a deep breath, she set her eyes on the road ahead. A dangerous path awaited, but she would walk it. For her village. For the kingdom. For herself. The earth shook. A deep rumble echoed through the land, as though the very bones of the world were shifting. The kingdom, once vibrant and full of life, now trembled beneath the weight of the curse. Crops withered as though the sun itself had abandoned them. Rivers, once mighty and wide, flooded with black water that carried the scent of decay. The skies, dark and heavy, wept storms that never ceased. The villagers could do nothing but watch in fear as their world fell apart. "Is this the end?" they whispered, looking to the horizon as lightning split the sky. The young woman stood, watching the chaos unfold. She could feel it, deep inside her, that the curse was spiraling out of control. It was growing stronger, feeding on the suffering it had caused. If she didn't act now, everything would be lost. With a heart full of urgency, she set out once more, her feet pounding the earth as she followed the ancient paths. The words of the sorcerer echoed in her mind, his warnings mixing with her own doubts. Can I really stop it? Or is this already too far gone? The path twisted through forgotten lands, and darkness pressed in from every side. But still, she moved forward. The temple lay ahead, deep beneath the earth, where the curse had first been sealed. After what seemed like an eternity, she found it, a chamber hidden by time itself. She stepped into the cool, dark room, her eyes searching for the source of all the trouble. And there, standing at the center, was the stone, still glowing with dark energy. Its power pulsed, casting shadows on the walls, and as she approached, she felt the weight of the ancient curse pressing down on her. Her hands trembled as she reached out, her fingers brushing the stone. She turned her attention to the inscriptions surrounding it, her eyes scanning the ancient words. As she deciphered the markings, the truth began to unravel before her. The curse, she learned, had once been a protective force. Cast by the kingdom's ancestors to shield the land from a deadly enemy, it had turned into a weapon of destruction over the years, feeding off the kingdom's pain and sorrow. Her heart sank. The curse was never meant to protect. It was meant to control, and it had grown too powerful to stop. "I've awakened something I don't understand," she whispered to herself. "And it's too late now." But as she stood there, consumed by the weight of this discovery, a figure stepped from the shadows. The sorcerer. His eyes gleamed with the knowledge of centuries, his presence suffocating the air. "You see, don't you?" he said, his voice cold and calculating. "This is where it all began. And now, it will be where it ends. But not in the way you think." He stepped closer, his smile twisted with ambition. "You were never meant to break the curse, child," he sneered. "You think you can control it? I will use you to rewrite the magic. I will make the curse serve me, and when it does, I will rule the kingdom." The young woman's heart raced as the air crackled with dark power. She could feel the curse's energy rising, responding to the sorcerer's will. "You have no power over it," she retorted, her voice shaking with fear and defiance. But the sorcerer raised his hands, and the stone shuddered in response. Dark energy swirled around them, the earth itself groaning under the weight of the magic. "You are nothing but a tool," he laughed. "A tool I will use to rewrite the future." The young woman's mind raced. She had no way to stop the curse. No way to stop him. Or so she thought. As the dark power swirled around them, something inside her shifted. The sorcerer was wrong. She wasn't here to break the curse, she was here to control it. The curse didn't belong to him. It didn't belong to anyone. She could shape it, not destroy it. In that moment, she found her strength. She would no longer be the pawn in this ancient game. The ground beneath her feet trembled as she stepped forward, drawing on the deep power of the curse. "No," she said, her voice steady. "I am not your tool. I control this now." The curse pulsed in the air, swirling around them both. The young woman's body trembled as she fought to harness its energy, not to break it, but to shape it into something new. Something that could protect, not destroy. The sorcerer sneered and tried to force his will on her, but the young woman stood firm. The magic lashed out, but instead of destruction, it shifted. The power turned, bending to her will. A brilliant light erupted from the stone, blinding in its intensity. The curse, the dark force that had terrorized the land for so long, transformed. It was no longer a weapon of chaos. Now, it was a shield. The land shuddered, the sky clearing as the dark clouds dissipated. The earth calmed, and the rivers began to flow with fresh, clear water. The crops, once withered and dying, began to bloom again. The sorcerer's eyes widened in disbelief as he fell to his knees. His plans, his manipulation, were undone in an instant. "No!" he cried out, his voice full of desperation. The young woman stood tall, her heart steady as she watched the kingdom's suffering begin to heal. "You will never control this power again," she declared, her voice unwavering. "The curse ends here." With one final, desperate scream, the sorcerer's power was drained, his body falling limp as the curse's malevolent energy left him. And with that, the land was saved. The kingdom slowly began to heal. The skies cleared, the crops grew tall, and the rivers flowed once more. The people celebrated, their joy rising to the heavens as the young woman returned, her heart full of hope and determination. She had done it. She had saved them all. The curse, once a tool of destruction, had become a protector, guarding the kingdom against any future harm. The young woman's courage and wisdom had changed the course of history. And as she stood among her people, the sun rose over a land reborn. The land, once barren and broken, now breathed with life. The fields, which had been empty and cracked, now sprouted with green shoots, reaching for the sun as if to reclaim what was theirs. Rivers, once poisoned and swollen, began to flow with fresh water, their currents carrying away the darkness that had once ruled them. The sky, heavy and storm-laden, cleared. The sun shone brightly over the land once again, casting its warm rays upon the kingdom that had suffered so much. Peace returned to the people. The air was filled with laughter, songs, and the sounds of children playing in the streets. The villagers, who had once cowered in fear, now stood tall with hearts filled with gratitude. They gathered in the open spaces, raising their voices in praise, thanking the earth, the sky, and the spirit of the kingdom for their deliverance. "We are free. Free at last." They cheered, their joy filling the air. Among them stood the young woman, her heart full of quiet pride. She had done it. The curse was broken, and the kingdom was saved. But even as the villagers celebrated, she knew that her true victory was not in the magic that had been undone, but in the choice she had made, to break the cycle, to free the kingdom from the grip of hatred and destruction that had lasted for generations. The people looked to her with awe, their eyes filled with admiration. They called her a hero, a savior. They spoke of her courage, her wisdom, her strength. But she stood apart, watching them with humility. She was not one for grand celebrations or endless praise. The victory was not hers alone, it was the kingdom's, the people's, the earth's. Then, the village elder approached. He was an old man, his back slightly bent, but his presence commanded respect. He bowed low before her, his voice filled with deep reverence. "You saved us all, even when you did not know what you carried," he said. His words sank deep into her heart. "You have freed the kingdom, and in doing so, you have freed yourself." The young woman's heart swelled with a bittersweet feeling. Yes, she had freed the kingdom, but in doing so, she had also freed herself from the weight of the curse, from the fear that had haunted her for so long. But it was not her power that had brought victory, it was her choice to face the darkness, to break the cycle of destruction that had plagued the kingdom for too long. Under the guidance of the wise elders, the villagers set to work. They rebuilt their homes, their lives, and their communities. The land, once ravaged by the curse, now flourished. There was no longer any talk of fear or doom, but of hope and renewal. The people who had once been divided by fear now came together, united in their efforts to restore what had been lost. They shared stories, not of the curse that had nearly destroyed them, but of the hero who had changed their fate, who had broken the cycle of destruction and brought peace. Far away, the sorcerer was exiled. Stripped of his power, he was left to wander, a shadow of the man he once was. His ambition, his greed, and his betrayal had cost him everything. The kingdom would not suffer under his hand again. The young woman thought of him as she watched the kingdom begin to heal. She saw how his choices had led to ruin, how his thirst for power had destroyed all he had sought to control. But now, he was nothing. The kingdom had moved on, and with it, the people had found a new way forward. As the kingdom flourished, the young woman found herself at peace. The weight of the curse was gone. The fears that had held her captive for so long had melted away with the darkness. She was free now, not just from the curse, but from the shadow of the past. The future was open to her, full of possibility. She would live, not as the bearer of the curse, but as a woman who had chosen to face the truth and change her world. She looked to the horizon, her heart filled with hope. The kingdom had been saved. But more than that, it had been transformed. And she knew that her actions would forever change the history of the land. One final time, the village elder called to her. He stood tall, his old eyes filled with wisdom, and spoke the words that would stay with her forever. "You have proven yourself not through power, but through wisdom," he said. "You will carry this story into the future, teaching the generations to come." His words were more than praise, they were a charge. A charge to teach, to lead, and to pass on the wisdom that had saved the kingdom. The young woman nodded, understanding. The legacy of the curse was not just in the breaking of it, but in the lessons learned from it, the choice to break the cycle, the wisdom to choose a new path. The kingdom had entered a new era. The curse had been lifted, and the people could now live in peace, free from the shadows of the past. And the young woman, once a simple daughter of an elder, was now a leader in her own right, a symbol of hope, courage, and resilience for the people. She would lead them into a future of prosperity and peace, and the story of how the curse was broken would be passed down for generations. The kingdom had been saved. The curse had been lifted. And a new chapter had begun. The wind brushed gently across the land, carrying the scent of fresh earth. It swept through the tall grasses, the trees and the villages, all of which stood quiet, bathed in the warmth of the setting sun. The young woman stood at the edge of the village, her eyes fixed on the peaceful land she had helped restore. She had never imagined such calm could return after the storm of chaos and fear that had once gripped her people. The world was still, yet full of life, and she wondered how everything had changed so quickly, how peace had come so quietly. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, she felt the weight of her journey. She had traveled far, faced darkness, and made choices that would forever shape the kingdom. And now, standing in the silence of the land she had saved, she understood something deep. True power doesn't come from magic or strength alone, she thought, the wisdom of her experiences settling in her heart. It comes from knowing when to fight and when to make peace. It comes from within. The journey had taught her that strength wasn't in the force of her hands, but in the power of her heart. Her path had not been one of destruction, but of understanding. Understanding what was worth fighting for and what was worth letting go. The curse that had once haunted her thoughts now seemed different. What had once appeared as an ancient punishment, a force of darkness, now felt like a lesson. A test. A challenge meant not to break her, but to teach her. It was a tool, yes, but a tool that she had chosen to stop, not to wield. The curse wasn't just a weapon. It was a lesson about balance. About renewal. About wisdom. As she reflected on all that had passed, she understood that saving the kingdom wasn't about defeating an enemy or overpowering forces. It was about understanding her role. Her true power had never been in the curse or in any magic. It was in the responsibility she had taken up as a protector. The kingdom had always needed its heart to guide it, its people, their wisdom, their ability to choose peace. And that had been her choice. To wield wisdom, not power. To stop the curse, not by force, but by understanding its true nature. She looked back at her life. She had once been a young woman unsure of the weight her ancestors' stories carried. Her heart had once been clouded by doubt and skepticism. But now, standing in the calm of the restored land, she understood the true meaning of those stories. She saw clearly the ancient wisdom that had been passed down to her. The curse had never truly been a curse at all. I was never cursed, she whispered to herself, walking slowly through the village. I was chosen. In that quiet moment, she realized the depth of her destiny. The curse had not been her burden to bear, it had been her mission to end. She was not meant to be a victim, but a protector. Chosen by the land, the ancestors and the spirits, she had become the guardian of her people. It was not magic or strength that had saved them. It was her heart, her ability to listen, to feel, to care. It was her compassion, her wisdom, and her willingness to change. The land had been healed, and her heart was steady. Now, she understood the true power. True power wasn't in dominance, it was in nurturing. The true power of a leader wasn't in taking control, but in guiding the people towards a future of peace. With a deep breath, she made a vow to herself, one that was both silent and eternal. She would protect the kingdom, not through force, but through the lessons she had learned. Her journey was not just one of battle, but one of becoming the heart of the kingdom. She would lead, not with a sword or magic, but with the wisdom of her ancestors and the strength of her spirit. The kingdom had been restored, but she knew her work had only just begun. The curse ends here, she thought, her voice steady, her resolve unshakable. Now the kingdom will grow not in fear, but in wisdom. Her role had become clear. The young woman, once unsure of her place, now stood firm in her power. Not the power of strength, but the power of heart. The people would follow her, not because of her force, but because of the wisdom she shared. The future was not a battle to be won, but a path to be built. And as the sun sank lower, casting its final rays across the peaceful land, she knew that her legacy would endure. The hero who had ended the curse was not a warrior, but a leader who nurtured wisdom, who taught the generations to come how to build not in fear, but in harmony. The kingdom was saved. Peace had been restored. And her journey, one of heart, wisdom, and protection, was only just beginning.